What if I told you poker was not just about money, but cats, clothes, and even wives at stake? From the woman who outplayed her husband for millions to a love triangle settled at the card table, these 8 poker stories are as wild as they are true. Number 1. Picture this. 2 brothers, both vying for the affection of the same woman, decide to let the poker table determine their romantic fate. The stakes? Not money, not pride, but the heart of Miss Jessie Peltier herself. The match was held at Rolette, North Dakota, and the older brother, James Belknap, emerged victorious, and with his win came plans to marry Jessie. James, confident his poker skills had secured his happily ever after, left town to start preparing for the wedding. But fate, or perhaps karma, had other plans. When James returned, his bride-to-be was nowhere to be found. Digging into the mystery, James discovered the ultimate betrayal. Jessie had eloped to Canada with his younger brother, George, the so-called loser of the poker game. The East Oregonian newspaper, in true 1913 fashion, did not question the logic or morality of this bizarre series of events. Instead, it framed Miss Jessie Peltier as the unreasonable one, slapping on the audacious subtitle, "Young Woman Elopes with Suitor Who Loses Her in Card Game." Number 2. Asher Conniff's story might be the ultimate proof that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, even in poker. In 2015, Conniff pulled off one of the most incredible wins in poker history, all thanks to a misclick. Fresh off a $200,000 victory at the Spring Poker Open, Conniff intended to join an online poker tournament, but fate had other plans. Instead of registering for his intended game, Conniff accidentally entered a $15,000 buy-in live poker event scheduled the next day. Conniff wasn't thrilled. He had plans for a family vacation and tried everything to back out of the tournament, but the buy-in was non-refundable, so reluctantly, he showed up at the Borgata, ready to take a field of 239 players. The competition was fierce, packed with seasoned poker pros who had likely dreamt of this moment for years. Conniff, on the other hand, was simply trying to make best of his mistake. Fast forward 6 hours, and Conniff wasn't just holding his own, he was dominating. Against all odds, he clinched the victory, walking away with an astounding $973,000 in prize money. Number 3. If you think women in poker are a modern phenomenon, let me introduce you to Mrs. Tom, the original poker queen of 1897. Her story, published in the Roanoke Times on December 8th of that year, is a timeless reminder that when it comes to poker, skill and maybe a bit of patience always works out. Mrs. Tom had grown wary of watching her husband, a businessman known only as Tom, gamble away his fortune night after night. But instead of confronting him or walking away, she devised a far more ingenious plan. She challenged him to a game. From the very first night, Mrs. Tom proved she wasn't just another passive spectator. She was relentless, never losing a single dollar. Tom, caught off guard by her unexpected poker prowess, became consumed with beating her. His obsession grew to the point where he abandoned his other poker games entirely, pouring all his time and effort into their nightly matches. By the time 6 months had passed, Mrs. Tom had amassed an incredible $200,000 in her portion of the vault, a jaw-dropping $6 million in today's money. Number 4. Mrs. Alma Olson's story is one of courage, heartbreak, and a touch of the absurd. A deeply religious woman, she refused to stop praying even as her husband insisted her faith was jinxing his fortunes at the poker table. As his poker losses mounted, so did his rage, and life at home became unbearable. Mrs. Olson revealed that her husband, a carpenter earning $5 a day, was losing most of his wages at the card table and blaming her prayers for his failures. His behavior grew increasingly bad, forcing Mrs. Alma and her children to seek refuge with neighbors on more than one occasion. Desperate for freedom, Mrs. Olson made a startling move. In court, she chose to embrace her husband's wild claim, admitting she was a poker jinx. Her admission was a bold gambit aimed at convincing the judge to grant her a divorce, something almost unheard of at that time. Against all odds, it worked. Judge Graham ruled in Mrs. Alma's favor. Perhaps he believed Mrs. Alma deserved a better partner, or maybe he couldn't stand the thought of condemning a woman for praying, even if it supposedly interfered with a gambler's luck. Number 5. There have been some strange poker games in history, but nothing quite compares to the feline fiasco between Pete Snelling, better known as the Cat Hermit, and his rival, Old Man Booker of Clarkson. This wasn't your typical high-stakes game. No cash, gold, or property was on the line. Instead, it was a battle for the most absurd bragging rights imaginable. Who was the ultimate cat boss in Western New York? And naturally, the only way to settle such an earth-shattering debate was with a poker game where the chips were literal cats. According to reports, the game was fueled by professional jealousy, with both players determined to prove their superiority in years, hard luck, and number of cats. Snelling entered the match with a staggering bankroll of 50 cats and 20 kittens, while Booker's initial count remains a mystery. Full-grown cats were worth double the value of kittens, and every wager saw felines shuffled between rooms, crates, and boxes. The stakes escalated quickly, and at one point, Booker realized he was in deep trouble. Out of cats and desperate to stay in the game, he called for an emergency timeout, requesting 10 hours to hustle in for more cats. Like a true high roller, Booker returned in under 6 hours with 20 cats and 6 kittens, ready to raise the limits and push for victory. In the end, however, Snelling proved himself the ultimate cat connoisseur, walking away with the championship title and a jaw-dropping haul of over 100 cats and kittens. Number 6. In 1903, poker in New York's high society wasn't just a game. It was an underworld of scandal, desperation, and more drama than a soap opera. A reporter for the Evening World's home magazine tried to expose this hidden world, and what he uncovered reads like the juiciest gossip column of the era. When high society women found themselves losing at the poker table, they did not fold, they improvised. With wallets empty, they'd send bellboys, janitors, or any available agent to the nearest pawn shop, armed with diamond rings, bracelets, brooches, and necklaces. One particularly juicy tale involved a woman who pawned her wedding ring in a desperate attempt to recover her losses. Unfortunately, her messenger wasn't exactly trustworthy. The next morning, he returned not with her ring, but with a threat: pay him a handsome fee for his silence, or her husband would learn the truth. Blackmail on top of poker debt. What a hand to play. Number 7. In the spring of 1904, Yale University played host to a poker game so audacious it would make even today's high-stakes players blush. The story, which made its way from the New Haven to the Bisbee Daily Review in Arizona, is as much a snapshot of college antics as it is a testament to poker's boundless creativity. It began innocently enough with a group of students wanting to play poker but finding themselves embarrassingly short on cash. One bold genius among them proposed a solution. Why not wager with the clothes on their backs? The terms were as outrageous as they were specific. Each piece of clothing was assigned a value, and as losses mounted, players had to remove and deposit garments into the pot. The catch? Losers who ran out of clothes had to make their way back to their dorms wearing only pajamas, provided of course by the host of the game. The game carried on until midnight, when one unfortunate freshman, the freshie as the article politely calls him, hits rock bottom. Having lost everything but his dignity, and apparently his pajamas, he was promptly ejected into the cold night near a crowded theater. By the standards of 1904, this was scandalously close to indecent exposure. But when the local policeman intercepted him, instead of offering a citation, the officer got a surprising reply from the freshie. He said, "For excitement, it's the best poker game I have ever sat into." Number 8. The Roaring Twenties might have been all jazz in big cities, but in 1921 Billings, Montana, it was more about survival and poker. Money was so scarce that the men of the community refused to let their beloved poker games fall by the wayside. Instead, they hatched a plan that was as resourceful as it was ridiculous. An egg ante. Not cash, not chips, eggs became the currency of the game. At the time, eggs were the go-to barter item in Billings, often swapped for essentials like flour and sugar, so it only made sense to repurpose them for poker. Every night, the local farmers would gather cartons of freshly collected eggs in tow and play to their heart's content. Winners didn't head home with cash. They carted off eggs, which they'd later trade in town for their share of supplies.